through the chat feature. This program will be recorded. Now, I turn the program over to Robin Dermer, Florida Plan Giving Director.
Welcome, everyone, to the third part of our series on solution-focused strategies for financial health and well-being. Thank you for sharing your time with us this afternoon. I'm Robin Dermer, Florida Plan Giving Director, and along with my colleagues, Matt Bernstein, Chief Plan Giving Officer, Cynthia Hizami, Plan Giving Director for the West Coast, Bill Adolph in the Midwest, and Judy Feig in the Northeast, we're so glad that you've joined us. Today's topic is intergenerational giving and sustainability, best practices from the family office world. We are honored to have the brilliant and inspiring Jacqueline Duval with us this afternoon to share her vast experience in the field. Jacqueline chairs Herrick's Family Office Practice Group. She is of counsel in Herrick's tax department and will be a partner effective January 1st. Mazel tov, Jackie. Jackie concentrates her practice on domestic and international tax, as well as finance and investing, private equity, hedge funds, venture capital and investment funds, family offices, foundations, not-for-profits, and tax exempts, as well as real estate trading, prime brokerage, derivatives, and other financial products, and compliance and regulatory matters. She focuses a significant portion of her practice on the structuring and servicing of family offices and transactional work related to their investments. Working as outside counsel for both single and multi-family offices, Jackie collaborates on entity structuring and strategic operational issues, tax, investment execution, human resources, and employment law matters, as well as coordination of the total legal needs of her clients. She is highly regarded for her ability to establish immediate credibility with clients and other professional advisors, and is dedicated to working with her clients to define their legacy and ensure their vision for the future. We are so thrilled to have her here with us today. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you so much. Robin, thank you very much. I know Robin's going to be sharing my slides and she's going to be running them for me. So in a minute, I think we'll have those slides up and shared. Thank you so much for welcoming me today. I hope that all of you who are joining us are sitting in some warm, sunny place. I'm coming to us today from Pennsylvania, where it's pretty cold. And I want to thank, exit my full screen, sorry. I want to thank Robin and the Jewish National Fund for their essential work for Israel. And I'm really honored to be speaking here with you today. I'm a tax lawyer, as Robin mentioned, at Herrick Feinstein. I chair the Family Office Group. That's a team of lawyers that provides coordinated legal advice to family offices, and we act as an outside general counsel to them. My work generally involves complicated tax rules related to investments and charitable giving, and all the ways that high net worth families interact with their wealth. And this wealth may come from operating businesses or investment funds. There may be 1 or 2 or 3 generations involved or not involved with that wealth. And I spent 13 years before joining Herrick in-house at a family office as their tax counsel and deputy general counsel. So my background really spans being both inside of a family office and giving them advice externally. And from that advice, time in the family office world, I've put together a set of lessons that are more universal. You don't need to have billions for these lessons to be useful. And so I hope to share those with you today. So Robin, if we can move to the next slide. Also, Robin, on this screen share, it has, I wonder if there's a way to, that's perfect. Yep, now it's better. Great. So, and please do ask questions as I go along. If you put them in the chat, I will try to look there from time to time. So first, I just wanted to explain a little bit about what a family office is. And a family office is an entity, although sometimes it's not an entity, that manages a family's wealth, investments, operating entities, covers estate planning, charitable giving, and even really households and property. But not all family offices do all of these things, and some cover more than these things, like medical coordination, travel, airplanes, yachts, etc. But I think what's important is that there are a lot of these family offices throughout the country, and they're all different. If we can move to the next slide, please. So there's a saying in the family office world, if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. The one size doesn't fit all. They're all very different. And they're kind of like snowflakes. So they have their own intricacies that come about because of the family and its needs. And about 14% of family offices in the US have no structure at all. They're just either the existing operating business or the family as individuals. And then we see other structures as well. There are limited liability companies, which is the most used structure for family offices. There are taxable corporations, also called C corporations, and these are becoming pretty popular because of low corporate tax rates and certain tax structuring considerations. And then there are some S corporations that are also family offices. And the important piece about this lesson is just that the choice of how you invest and how you manage your wealth has implications. It has tax implications, it has legal and operational implications, and it has cost considerations. And so this is a place for, in a family wealth structure, where you would really want to consider ownership and transferability and how decisions get made, but also the tax and legal implications of a structure. So I would say that if you have to pick a place to spend some money on getting expert advice, accounting or legal or tax, this is a place to do that. And that's our first lesson. If you want to move on. So the other thing that's really important is to know when to use experts. This is a place where people bristle and say, why am I paying experts? I built my wealth. I know I've done a great job at it. I've had to do it all by myself. I'm an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are the original do-it-yourselfers. And they've spent years putting together businesses and business models and taking risks. And they don't mind spending time doing these things. But I think the lesson here from the family office world is that experts can really save you time and money, and in some cases, heartache. You may not be thinking of all the issues, and an expert can potentially give you the knowledge that your complicated structure is okay. It's not going to cause you heartache or legal concerns. I think that spending money here in the family office world, at least, is really a way of saving time and money and letting the entrepreneur and the family personnel who are making the wealth concentrate on making the wealth. And so that is part of this lesson. The other piece of this, knowing when to use experts, is that sometimes you want your experts to work for you in your company or in your family office. And you have a balance there, right? Because people who are experts outside the family don't rely on you for the roof over their heads or their paycheck, and they may be more willing to point out potential problems and give you bad news that you might not want to otherwise hear. Whereas people who work for you internally or are part of your family may not be as willing to do that. But people who are working for you as employees, they have a continuity and loyalty, and they really over time can act as your thought partner. And so I think a great way of bridging the gap here is to build relationships over time with trusted advisors, either in-house or outside, and know that that you are getting the most value and the most consistency and the most continuity. And I would just say that there are any number of places that we've seen in the family office world where outside providers can help you leverage your existing capabilities. Legal and compliance, absolutely, that's my world, but also accounting, investment management, technology, and operations. These are all places where we've seen family offices really able to scale by using outside providers. I'm gonna move on from here. So let me just check if there's any questions in the chat before I move on. I see chat one. Oh, it just says, please chat questions here. Good, okay, Perfect. I'm going to keep going. So united in purpose. This is not going to surprise anyone. And I think particularly in talking with families, like all of the donors on this call, being united in purpose is really integral to having common ground across generations for a family and its wealth. Family wealth is tricky. It brings emotions and obligations and ties and power inequities in some context. And you can have an older generation that's worked very hard to create wealth and rightfully has ideas about how best to continue that. And you can have a younger generation who believes that they know better. And so to bridge that, I think communication and the creation of common ground is just important. And this is kind of touchy-feely and it can be difficult. It's difficult to talk about money across generations. And it's difficult to take the time for this. But I think that this responsibility and connection and the sense of common purpose really can impact a family in very positive ways. So depending on the complexity of the family, what we see in a family office is really the creation of a written family mission statement. Some of you may have done personal mission statements. I know I have, to see what it is that's important to you in terms of your core values and how you present yourself to the world. And a family mission statement is very similar. So it creates a origin story of the family. It celebrates the history. It explains how the wealth was created. It celebrates that. It's really an intended document as a document that's inclusive and collaborative. It's not supposed to be handed down from the senior people in the family to the junior people. It's really meant to be a created document together, writing the story of the family. And important for this is that families change over time. And having a conversation about that and revisiting the mission statement to see exactly what it is that drives your family and creates your purpose is important. So I would suggest that sit down with your family, make it an event, and then revisit it on some schedule, 5 years, 10 years, times of change. It's an important piece for really any family. And I think that going hand in hand with that is the demystification of the family's wealth. So this is really a way to get the younger generation involved in conversations around wealth. The investment policy statement can be another place for that. Involve the generations of the family with the objectives of investing. And that can span the concentration and different kinds of assets that you may want to invest in, or your liquidity needs as a family, or whether there are any impact investments that you care about. And then obviously, and part of our purpose today is to talk about charitable giving. Charitable giving is a prime way to align the purpose of a family. I have another slide on that coming up, so I won't go into it too much here, but we're going to talk about that some more. And then finally, to be united in purpose, everybody really needs to have a role and a job, something they're responsible for that generates pride and accountability and connection to the family. And you don't need to be running the family business to have accountability. So that's the lesson 3, being united in purpose. And move on to lesson 4. Shall I check the chat? Nope, we're good. Lesson 4, be prepared. So we should all be prepared. This is good for all families. This is not a family office only conversation. This is really meant to be bridging families of all profiles. Education and resilience and wealth planning are going to be important. Succession planning, if you have a family business, and the generational transfer of wealth, those all require preparation. And succession planning can be a very touchy subject, and families may not want to discuss it. But the transparency means that people won't be surprised, and there won't be hurt feelings or people who have resent as the family generations progress. And really the education piece of this is training people to be leaders, to manage, to learn about wealth and investments, and to run a business if that's what your family does. And these are the kinds of actions that keep a wealthy family aligned and working together. We should also remember that there may be people in that generation the next generation, who don't want to be in the same business, and that's okay. But educating them to understand how that wealth works will still have benefits in terms of understanding the structure and having transparency. Estate planning is part of being prepared, of course. This is a place where, everybody should really be dotting their I's and crossing your T's. You want to make sure your documents are in order, your wills, your trusts, your beneficiaries are designated, your insurance is all set up, and that any compliance actions are covered. And your personal estate planner can help you with that. And that's an important box to check. And then I would just mention in the Be Prepared lesson that resilience for families really requires flexibility. And this goes back to the discussion we had on the previous slide about reviewing and revisiting your planning. Tax rules and business rules are going to change. Family relationships change. Life events will alter the dynamics of a family. And a resilient family will be able to meet those because they are flexible. So that's my lesson 4, be prepared.
Jackie, I'm just going to stop for a second, because I think it's so important when you talk about communication and among the generations and a mutual respect, because it's very true, just because the family's in a business and have acquired this wealth doing XYZ, that doesn't mean that the next generations are going to be aligned with that same passion and that same drive. So I love the idea of creating the family mission statement and revisiting it also as people in the family, get married and children are born, and things are constantly evolving and changing and growing. So I think that's a really important lesson that all of us can take home and practice.
I think we do see that with family businesses as well, that the second and third generations, that's where the businesses can fail, and they can fail, but they don't have to fail. And the ones that don't fail have had these conversations, and they're difficult conversations. So
thank you for bringing that to the forefront. So we're on lesson 4, right?
We are on lesson 4, and we're moving to lesson 5.
Got it.
So lesson 5, we've come back to the practicing of philanthropy. So I think that in every family office that I've worked with, there has been a focus on philanthropy. And philanthropy is core to families' identity and to their own way of giving. It's a place to really create a legacy that can align family mission and values and purpose. And I'm going to spend some time on this one because, first of all, we're here today with the Jewish National Fund, and their mandate is giving, and giving in ways that are aligned with your purpose and your passion. And so I wanted to make sure I covered this one, but really it's because there is every person in the family, if they can agree on what their core values look like, can agree on how to give to make the world a better place and to really create a legacy. This is a key focus for families in generational happiness. There are, of course, direct gifts to charities. That's one place that you could focus. And this, these are the things that you see, like you can help with buildings and have your name on a building or a hospital or a cooking school. And we see those opportunities. I've seen JNF's beautiful presentation on those. So I know that there are plenty of those kinds of opportunities. And then you can make direct gifts in any way that your family is aligned. Maybe there's a school that's important to you, a university, or even a grade school, or there's a particular social issue or medical issue that concerns your family, either because your family has experience with it or it's an area that has a deep place in your heart. And so a direct gift to charity is one main focus. We also see family offices looking at private foundations. Private foundations are a tricky vehicle. They are very complicated to run, but if you have substantial money for a private foundation, it is a way of helping to really channel your giving and make a change in an impactful way. But I would just caution you that if you're thinking of starting a private foundation, there are lots of hoops and rules, and you really do want to make sure that you have real strong legal advice on that. And then there are other options for charitable giving as well. There are sort of donor advised funds, there are charitable trusts. And then there is also something that people use called a charitable limited liability company. It really is just a company that you set up as an individual that is, from a tax perspective, is disregarded. You wholly own it, and it may make donations on your behalf, but because it's deemed to be directly owned by you and not separate from you, you get a deduction there. That's no different than making a personal deduction, but some people like to have this limited liability company as sort of a little fund to use. And then there's another area that I've put here on this practice philanthropy slide, which is really investments that are sort of philanthropic. So impact investments or social entrepreneurship, these are places where you may not have a tax deduction for this, it's an investment, but you may see that it's furthering a purpose that you care about. So you might invest in a company that's in a developing area or in a city area that needs economic support. Or you may invest in municipal bonds that are supportive of fixing, like there's one that I personally invested in that is fixing lead pipes in Newark, New Jersey, so that people have clean drinking water. It's a municipal bond, but I know that the money is going to do something good. So those are investments that have a philanthropic bent to them. I'd say that's an area that's really pretty hot right now, is the sort of impact investment area. I wanted to mention, I got a question in the chat, and it says, how many generations down the road do you usually see a family business that may start to fall apart?
That's a great question.
Great question. So thanks to whoever asked that question. I think what we see is usually 2 generations, and it's the third 2 or 3 generations. And what's really important to stop that from happening is that that generation feels connected to the hard work and wealth generation that happened generations before it. I think we all care about our children being responsible and not feeling entitled and all of those kinds of normal parental needs that we have. But really, for a family business, that connection is even more economically important. They need to feel like this is their business too. And the way you do that is to involve them, or involve them in whatever wealth that business has thrown off in a way that they have connection to it. So thank you for that question. Our next lesson from the family office world is to agree on who decides. So some of these themes are, you'll see this is consistent with other themes, and they really involve communication and transparency. And the processes and boundaries that come around a family's wealth, that can exist around it, support the unity of that family as it goes through generations and as its wealth profile shifts or changes in terms of amounts or in terms of how it's invested. And I think this goes back to the family mission statement. Maybe I could have included this on the same slide, but I think it really does bear its own conversation. Who makes decisions? Who's allowed to make those decisions? How do we make those decisions? Some families, some family offices with multiple generations, and you see this more where you may have had a couple generations back, maybe 3 or 4 generations back, and there was substantial wealth created, and now you have a really splintered generation 3 or 4, because you might have 80 people in that generation at that point. You may have had a grandfather who had a steel company, I'm making this up, and now you have generation 4, and there are 82 people around the world who have a family foundation who need to make decisions together. So these, the lesson from that kind of a family structure is that a family council or a family assembly basically represents different branches of the family in a place where a shared vision and values can be set. So a family governance is important. If the patriarch or matriarch who has created that wealth is still alive, then they may feel that they get to make all the decisions. And that may be true for that family, but there should be an understanding of that, because if you don't understand and there's not transparency, people are going to have some resent. And then there are also issues of wealth governance. So wealth governance means that if you have accumulated wealth, somebody is responsible for distributing it. And often what you'll have seen is that people a couple generations back may have set up trusts. So there may be trustees, or they may have put together an investment vehicle that has managers, or there may even be a family trust company that manages the wealth of the family. And who controls the distribution of the wealth matters, because you may have a generation of younger people who are wealthy, but don't have access to that wealth. And as long as there is information available, because they understand how that can come to them or will come to them, that gives them information that they need. And then I'd say business governance. So business governance is if there's an existing operating business or existing investments, who's responsible for that? When does that responsibility shift generationally? How do you train those people to come in who are in the younger generations to come and take responsibility? Or are you going to now outsource that responsibility to third parties? Because that's a totally reasonable way also of having oversight for those investments. Many families do that. They will have the family wealth is now third party managed, and it's managed with a specific profile of risk and concentration and, you know, whatever environmental, social kinds of investments the family cares about. And the family members themselves don't have say over those investments. That is another way of governing the investments. So I'd say that people in families have expectations of what their roles are and what their own agency is in their decision making. And so this lesson really is one of those places where we can avoid conflict in an area that's tricky to talk about. I think we go to the next slide.
I was just going to ask, you talk about avoiding conflict. A lot of what you're discussing, Jackie, is preventative, setting the foundation in place to avoid conflict later on.
That really is the key to a family office when we see that, because it's a lot of wealth concentrated with people who are good at
pushing each other's buttons.
Control. Good at pushing each other's buttons. Exactly, Robin. There are a couple more questions in the chat before I go on to this last slide. It's actually gone. My seven lessons have gone pretty quickly, but I can answer these questions. So, is there a minimal amount to establish a single family office? And there is a general answer to that it's about $100 million. And the reason for that is because of the costs of running a single family office. You're really going to be setting up an entity and hiring staff. But as I mentioned earlier, family offices, you've seen one. And there are lots of ways to create, even in an outsourced way, the pieces of a single family office without having to have your own general counsel and your own chief investment officer and your own COO. And so depending on the level of wealth and the complexity of your own family and properties that you may own and whatever other services you would want to have covered by a single family office. That's sort of, you have to back into that number. But the general rule of thumb that you see printed is $100 million.
So what is the difference, Jackie, between a single family office and a multifamily office?
That's a great question. So a multifamily office is a family office that has been set up. Usually, originally, it was set up by a single family, and then they realized that they were doing a pretty good job of running investments and bill paying and household staff and managing the art collection, and they set themselves up to then offer those services to other families because they had the expertise and the structure set up. And so I think Bessemer Trust is one of these, and Rockefeller. And these are ones these are multifamily offices who were established originally to service one family and ended up making a business out of the servicing of family offices. And what you see there is the sort of efficiencies of scale. And so if you, and they're offering a platform for families that may not have enough of their personal wealth to justify a single family office at this point.
Okay, so the threshold would be a little bit lower than what you described for a single family office with a multifamily office.
Probably, although to be honest, it's also a matter of operational ease because the multifamily offices are set up for you, right? A single family office, you are establishing yourself as your family. And so, but what you do get with the single family office is you can really make it bespoke. It's yours. You might want a general counsel and you might not care about having a chief investment officer because you're going to outsource that. Or you might want a chief investment officer, but you're going to outsource the legal and accounting. So there are definitely, there are different services that you can get provided in a multifamily office, and you might not want the entire menu.
Okay. I was just thinking of the Chinese menu too, from column A, one from column B. You make it your own.
Yeah, another question in the chat, which was, who's part of the family? I love that question. That goes to your family mission statement. Who is part of the family? You have kids and you have grandkids, but you also have spouses of children, you have ex-spouses of children, and you have girlfriends and boyfriends and partners and just a whole bunch of people. You have friends who have been connected to the family for so long, they're like family. And here's the great piece of that. The family gets to decide who's part of the family, but it's part of that conversation. Because again, for transparency perspective, if you as the matriarch or patriarch of the family or the family council want to provide family members with some benefit, whether it's wealth transfer, etc., knowing who that family is matters, and that the other people aren't surprised or resentful can be avoided if you have a discussion about that. Now, one more comment about that, and it does flow into the last slide on lesson 7, and that is, you may not want to do these things for your family. You may, as the controller of the wealth, with very absolute rights, say, that isn't the way I want to run my family. I am in charge. And all I'm saying is having conversations will help, but you don't, it's yours to run. So lesson 7, family matters. I thought it was a nice little pun. Mixing business and pleasure. So I wanted to remind us that as we look at these family wealth platforms, these are really platforms for managing wealth over generations and ensuring legacy and running a business and running investments, that peppered throughout all this is a family, and family dynamics are a fact. Disagreements are going to happen. And unlike in an office where you have a disagreement and you can like brush it off and go home, you're having that disagreement and you are home. So I think it's really important, particularly in a family that has a lot of wealth, that it's it's managing and having to deal with on a day-to-day basis, that the family takes time to celebrate and find the joy of being a family. And there are many ways to do that. And actually, I think that charitable giving is one of those ways. So you're celebrating your legacy and you're being thankful for the wealth that you've created and you've been given by giving back. But I also mean birthday parties, and I also mean take a trip to Florida together. And when it's safe to do that. And I also mean just being together whenever you can. And for right now, that may mean doing it on Zoom so that everybody's safe. But there will be a time where you can be together again as families, and celebrating the family as much as possible is another lesson from the family office world. They really do try to do that. And the successful families are ones that make sure that they have a Super Bowl party every year, or that they take time to go to the opera together, whatever it is that drives you as a family, that's special to you, that you do that. And that is my seven little lessons. And I'm really happy to take more questions or anything you want to ask me, Robin.
They were absolutely wonderful. I'm gonna just, for 1 second, just eliminate the share. There we go. So I see there are 3 more questions here in the chat. We're always asked about the differences between a family foundation and a donor advised fund. What are the differences and the pros and cons of each?
Sure. So a donor advised fund, from a charitable giving perspective, is a public charity that you can deduct your donation to, and then you advise the donor advised fund on your recommendations for giving that money further. And so you get a current deduction for the cash that you donate, and then over time, the donor advised fund will itself, as a public charity, use those funds for charitable purposes. And as a donor, you can recommend how those are further given. It's similar to a family foundation, because you are giving your money to an entity, and then that entity will give it further in the purposes that you have asked it to do. Hopefully, but they're not required to, right? So a donor advised fund, the legal requirement there is that you recommend, and the donor advised fund doesn't have to, but almost always does. As long as it's a real charitable gift, follow the donor's recommendations. The private family foundation is a special kind of entity where the family will, or any donors can together give money, but not be a public charity. It is not a public charity. It's a private foundation. It's required, if it wants to remain tax exempt, to follow special rules for private foundations, and those rules will require it to use a specific portion of its assets every year as a distribution in furtherance of its charitable purposes. But those assets can also accrete and earn money within the foundation. But again, every year you have to make a minimum distribution to charitable entities.
So that sounds like a pretty distinct difference. Here at Jewish National Fund, we have a donor advised fund.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the differences, like you mentioned, is with a foundation, 5% annually is required to be granted or distributed.
Yes,
with a donor.
Mm-hmm.
With our donor advised fund, one of the benefits, if we're doing pros and cons, is that there is a tremendous amount of flexibility. You can make that donation and decide that year, then take the charitable deduction in the year you make it, but you don't have to necessarily make the grant until you're ready.
There are better deductibility limits for donations to public charities. And so the donor advised fund, as being a public charity and not a private foundation, you as the individual donor can give a higher level of your adjusted gross income. And the kinds of assets that you give to a public charity, like a donor advised fund, the rules for the deduction that you get when you're, for example, donating stock or assets, appreciated assets are better if you're giving them to a public charity than they are to a private foundation. So those are some things to consider as well. And the other thing about private foundations is that they are really complicated to run, and they have to be extremely careful that the holdings of that private foundation and the activities do not give a private benefit to the donors who have funded them. And that can be tricky. There are, even things like sharing office space is a problem, can be a problem. Even things like any asset transfer where the donor, there are some very strict rules that called the self-dealing rules, where the private foundation and the substantial contributor, the disqualified person who has contributed to the foundation, there are some limits on what they can do.
Okay. Are there any questions? Let me check and see if we have anything else in the chat. This said, there seems to be a trend with family offices, the foundation with the 5%. So we've already went over that question. And the next one is, what are the practicalities, examples of how one would bring the generations together with diverse interests and diverse values? Like how does one take grandma and the a young adult and the middle generation, the sandwich generation, and sort of get them on the same page? Or if you have examples in your practice of dividing things up in a way that everybody's desire and vision is satisfied.
So I think one great way of doing that and aligning people is to really get people together in a room and have that conversation. So we've had that theme throughout these slides. If you know that you have a younger generation who are focused more on environmental issues or potentially impact investments, then giving them some leeway to do those kinds of investments and donations really is a way of making them connected to the family's wealth, right? So it may be that you want that younger generation to be involved, but you don't have the same charitable or investment goals, but giving them something that's theirs and that they can run with, but still be part of the family and be accepted that way, I think can be really helpful. And then there are actually people whose job it is to bring these, they are like
facilitators.
They're family office sort of therapists, effectively. I'm using that as a they try to bring, it's like a coach. They try to bring your mission, your core values, celebrate that history, and they create with you that mission statement. And those advisors and they're consultants, that's what they actually call themselves. Sorry, I was like, what's the word I'm looking for? Consultant. They are really trained. Most of them are actually ex-lawyers who found their passion somewhere else after they were lawyers, and they have seen how these family offices have operated, and they know some of the pitfalls, and they have moved to be how to create the continuity of generations for a family that has wealth.
That must be an amazing position, to know that you're connecting the generations to be able to facilitate that.
Yeah, I've met a couple of these people. They're really interesting. It's very touchy-feely, but it's okay. It's a family.
Well, it takes a special kind of a person to be able to do that, I guess, depending on the family dynamics, right?
Sure, of course. I see Bethany has put another question in my chat, and that is, what's the best way to ensure that your charitable giving choices continue with the next generation? Yeah, so, well, I think aligning that generation with your charitable goals early on and having them feel connection to it is important. So if there are events that, let's say use events that, like with JNF, if you go a trip to Israel and visit the kinds of places and properties that have been created by the charitable giving you've given in the past, and connecting them to that. And they also have the memory of going with their grandparent or whoever it is, to see what their family wealth has created. That connects them. So that would be one way of doing it. It's just making sure that they have seen the impact of that giving. I think the other way to ensure that is to give them their own charitable currency, as it were, to make donations in a specific area and say, like, here, I'm going to give you, here's
X
$10,000.
amount.
Pick something to give to, and here's a range of things that you might want to consider. And they might want to consider something else too, but the conversation can be had.
Beautiful. The next question that we have are, what are the cautions one should consider when dealing with in-law children? And what is your experience with that?
Well, I have personal experience, but so the caution is, of course, that in-law children can change, right? It's the obvious one that your in-law children, first of all, if it's a strong and permanent marriage, which we all hope for our children and their spouses, if that is the case, then you're still dealing with a whole other family that wasn't necessarily raised with your values because you didn't raise them. And then the other piece of that is that in the case of divorce, you have to know that you have if there are children in that marriage, you also want to make sure that you have enough. There's a lot of noise. Sorry. There's some, if you could hear me, there's a lot of background. I don't know. There's some kids. Are there kids there? Okay, no. I think in the case of divorce, you clearly want to make sure that you want a relationship with those grandchildren. And so keeping family dynamics at the forefront and understanding that any one of these family life events has to be navigated is important. I don't want to end on a sad question. Pick another one. You're on mute.
It's because my daughter is enjoying our treadmill, Jackie,
Oh.
and she sings while she runs. That's what you're hearing. So I apologize.
Awesome.
So I'm first of all, we are just so thrilled that you've all joined us. And as some of you may or may not be aware, I see some nods. So I hope that you've gotten something out of it. And I want you to know that we are available in our planned giving department. Bethany's going to go ahead and put our email addresses for any questions that you might have about what we do at Jewish National Fund in our department. We're also in the process of putting together an intergenerational summit that we're going to be holding, God willing, this July in San Diego. And it's going to be for your families to come and enjoy, get to know one another, perhaps create a family mission if you don't have one as of yet. There'll be workshops. It'll be an immersive experience and a way to really start, just like Jackie was describing, that communication. If you've already have great communication and you've got your family mission, to be able to take it up a couple notches to the next level. It's going to be held at Torrey Pines, and you can contact any one of us in the Planned Giving Department for more information on that if you would be interested in joining us. Now I want to again thank Jackie for an amazing program, and I'm just going to turn it over to our Chief Planned Giving Officer, Matt Bernstein, to give us some closing remarks. Thank you,
Robin.
Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie. Terrific, really high quality stuff. And we appreciate your time. And if you don't mind, we'll be calling on you again. So
I'm very happy to help. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you all do at Jewish National Fund for Israel.
So this concludes this is the third in our series of our fall series of Be Inspired, Be Informed. Look for something in the early part of next year. We'll have some new topics to go over. And if you have any questions, I'll reiterate what Robin said. about anything that you've heard today or even in the weeks prior, give your plan giving professionals a call. We'll be able to get some answers for you. We're happy to be of some service. So thank you. Happy Hanukkah. And maybe one day next year, we'll get to do this in person. What do you think?
Or join us in July.
Or join us or come and call us about our July workshop. It's going to be an extraordinary event. So let us know. Thank you all.
Thank you.